What is up, everybody? Today we are covering the kickers. Yes, the kickers, they're actually a really important part of your team. I've had weeks where I've had a kicker on Monday Night Football, and they won me in a very important matchup. So it is important to not miss on kickers, or at least figure out a good strategy for your kickers. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Before we get to the kickers, we are going to get to the questions that I asked you to give me. We do have a couple more questions today. So first of all, we have River Martin, who says, I'm high on Calvin Ridley this year, especially if Julio gets hurt. He can easily be a top 10 wide receiver. Thank you for the question, River Martin. Like I mentioned in the wide receiver video, with Calvin Ridley, just because Julio is there and Hayden Hurst is there, he's been talked up by Matt Ryan. I don't know how big his target share is actually going to be. That said, you are right. If something were to happen to Julio, he is a top 10 receiver. He is their future number one there. So if you think that Ridley can get you at least consistent wide receiver 2 numbers, maybe even low-end number 1, he's definitely worth a pick in the 4th to 5th round, because you never know what could happen. Julio is getting up there in age. Never know if an injury occurs or something. You could win your draft by getting Calvin Ridley in the 5th or 6th round. So if you can get him in that middle rounds, that would be a really good buy, especially if something happens to Julio. But nonetheless, he'll probably be a good wide receiver 2 for you. So something that you should definitely think about. Thank you for that comment. Be sure to keep them coming. And then we have one more from Stephen Poor again, who says, Oh boy. I have a running back question. Dalvin Cook is threatening to hold out until he gets a reasonable contract. Would you still draft him in the 1st round or no? I'm remembering a guy by the name of Le'Veon Bell. Yeah, I'm a Steelers fan, so I remember him, Steven. Who held out the entire year, and people who drafted them number 1 at the time were upset because it was a wasted 1st round pick. Do we take a chance on Dalvin Cook in the 1st round with the possibility of a holdout during the football season? I don't know if you're trying to rub something in there, Steven, being a Steelers fan or not. We'll leave it at that. But for Dalvin Cook, I'm not too afraid of drafting him because he is such a big part of their offense. Mike Zimmer wants to run the ball. He's such a big part of what they do. I think they will pay him, and he's made, I think, 12 to 13 million. I think they will pay him that as long as they feel comfortable with his medical problems that he's had in the past with injuries. So overall, I would say take Dalvin Cook probably the 6th or 7th pick, and I think you're still safe. I'm not putting too much weight on the holdout. I think they will pay him at some point. If you have a later draft, we're here middle of August or late August, and he still hasn't signed, then obviously take your foot off the gas pedal on Dalvin Cook. Maybe wait until late 2nd, early 3rd round. But the upside is so good just because we saw what he did last year. And in Gary Kubiak's offense, a lot of people think this could even help him more than what he was in Kevin Stefanski's offense, which was a run-heavy offense. So this really plays to Dalvin Cook's advantage. So I think that they will pay him. So I would say definitely take a chance on him. I remember Le'Veon Bell. I had him, I think, in one of the leagues the year that he held out. It was bad enough just being a Steelers fan that year. But I think you're pretty safe with Dalvin Cook. That's a very difficult question this early. But if you are in an early draft and you're in that range where you don't know really who to take, I would still take him over Derrick Henry. I think Darrynton Evans will be a 3rd down back, and I don't know if Derrick Henry can be quite as dominant as he was at the end of last year. I would probably take him ahead of Austin Ekeler. So if you can get him at the end of the 1st round, I think that's still decent value. I don't think there's too much risk as of yet, but something to definitely keep an eye on. So keep those questions coming. I promise you, if you ask me a fantasy football question, football-related question, I will answer it on the next episode, the next show. But to the kickers. You probably looked at the title of it, and you're like, oh, this is going to be garbage. Well, hopefully it isn't. I'm hoping to actually give you some good advice on which kickers to take. So we're going to start off with ones that I think are safe to draft. At the top, Justin Tucker. He's generally the top kicker. He's been the top kicker for years. Some people this year have actually put Harrison Butker as the number two or the number one fantasy kicker. I have him as my number two. We saw him post that video of him kicking like a 70-some yard field goal or something. It was definitely wind. There's definitely wind at his advantage. But after that, I think there's at the top. There's some really good kickers. Greg Zuerlein, Will Lutz. Those are also guys that I think you can take, in round 10 and stuff, and you get good value. The only thing is that in that 9th to 10th round range, I think there's some pretty good sleeper wide receivers, maybe a couple sleeper tight ends, maybe even a sleeper quarterback or running back, where I think you can get a kicker in round 15 or 16. Like, if you are comfortable with streaming a kicker, I recommend waiting, because like always, you can stream a kicker, you can stream a defense. You can't always stream a wide receiver, a quarterback, or a running back, especially in deeper leagues that go 12 to 14 teams. So I would say, in most cases, actually wait on the kickers, because I think you can find some good value rounds 14 to 16 or however far your draft goes. I think in the final couple rounds, you can get a couple kickers. In my opinion, I generally only try to carry one just because I need those other roster spots. But this year, a lot of fantasy leagues are opening up. There's going to be more bench spots because, what if a player tests positive for the coronavirus? We just saw Ezekiel Elliott test positive for the coronavirus. So if that happens, what do? You drop your whole team? I mean, a lot of people are expanding their rosters this year. So if your league is one of those leagues that has a wider roster, maybe you can consider keeping two kickers. But in most cases, whether you draft one early or take one late, just find one you're confident in and carry one, because that extra roster spot's going to be important. So, Butker, Lutz, Zuerlein, all guys, they'll probably go in that round 9 to 10 range. For me, that's a little bit high for kickers. I prefer waiting until like round 10, 11. But once you get past round 11, the run on kickers is usually done by then. It's either you draft one in round 9 or 10, or you wait until the end of the draft. And there's nothing really in between. So after that, I think you can afford to wait. And I'm even seeing Matt Gay fall in some leagues, and Zane Gonzalez. I mean, these were two of the top kickers last year. And I think those are two guys that are going to put up really good numbers again. They're going to be in high-powered offenses with Arizona and Tampa Bay. I think that they're going to be kicking a lot of field goals. They're going to be getting you a lot of points. They're going to be in the red zone a lot. I don't know how good their efficiency rating is going to be, how many times they're actually going to get touchdowns compared to field goals, but they're going to have scoring opportunities a lot, and that's something you want to look for in kickers that are going to have a chance to kick. So any of those guys, I think you can get early on and be happy with, but after that, there is a drop-off a little bit, but it's not as wide as some people seem to think. I think you're getting around 12 or 13 value in round 15, 16, 17 in most leagues with guys like Chris Boswell, who had a nice comeback year last year. I think he's going to have a really nice year. Jake Elliott from Philadelphia is a guy to keep an eye on. A lot of people are high on him. Matt Prater is a guy that I like just because he can kick the long field goals. Now, last year, Detroit didn't have anyone that was able to get them into scoring opportunity. When Stafford was healthy, they were actually scoring touchdowns. So last year was a little bit of an off year for Prater, but he still managed to get a couple long field goals a game to make up for it and still get you a solid outing most weeks. So if he falls, this year I'm seeing him going a little bit higher than in past years, but if he falls towards the end of the draft, around 15, 16, 17, take him. I like him as well. Brandon McManus is another one. Think of the Denver, the mile-high air and stuff, the altitude there and stuff. It really plays an advantage to kickers. So McManus, he was a little bit more accurate last year. I don't think he's really in any danger of losing his job. I think that as long as he'd be one guy I would watch in the preseason just because he has been inconsistent the past couple years. But if he can consistently hit the mid-range field goals, I think you're safe because he's going to hit you a 50, 60 yarder sometimes because of the altitude allowing it in Denver. So it's something to keep an eye on. Another guy's Eldrick Rosas from the Giants. A little bit of a down year last year, but I think the Giants are going to be scoring more this year, so he's someone that you can also keep an eye on. There are 5 guys that I'm kind of in between on. I'm not super hot on, not super low, and probably won't draft them, but they're guys that may turn out to be okay. Mason Crosby, Brett Maher, Daniel Carlson, a guy I like coming out of college, but he hasn't really lived up to the hype. He's had a lot of missed field goals. Dan Bailey and Kaimi Fairbairn. Fairbairn had a lot of missed field goals last year too. So those are guys, maybe you like them. You can let me know in the comment section if you think I'm wrong on this. But none of them just really excite me. Maybe Dan Bailey's a guy that I would consider drafting, but the rest of them, probably not. You can probably get them at the end of your draft. Those would be kickers I'd be willing to stream if they have a good matchup. But in most weeks, I would not want to carry them as my main kicker. And then for guys to totally avoid are Steven Hauschka, because I think Tyler Bass is going to beat him out. We'll get into Bass in just a moment. I think Hauschka is not going to win the starting job. He had a lot of missed field goals last year, and I like him. I think he's one of the top 32 kickers in the league. But I think Tyler Bass is legit and has a chance to be a fantasy sleeper at the kicker position. So I'm saying avoid Steven Hauschka. Do not draft him. I don't get the hype on Justin Rohrwasser. Maybe I'll be turned wrong, but I also haven't watched anything of him. I wasn't even aware of his name when he was drafted. There are only two kickers that I thought would actually get drafted, and that was Rodrigo Blankenship and Tyler Bass. So that surprised me to see Rohrwasser go off the board. Maybe Belichick knows what he's doing, or Belichick, as Steeler fans like to call him. If you're a Patriots fan, you're watching, I'm sorry I offended you, but you can chew me off in the comment section. We'll discuss that. But Joey Sly is another guy I would avoid. He started off really hot last year, and then I think he had one game where he missed several field goals in a row. It was probably one of the kickers I had. There were 3 weeks in a row last year where I had kickers that missed 3 field goals each game. I was getting 0 or 1 point for my kickers each week. I don't always do well with streaming kickers. That's why I generally find one that I like and then just hang on to him for the majority of the year. But I would say avoid Joey Sly. Graham Gano is still there. He's the other sleeper that we'll get into in a minute. And I actually think Gano still has a chance to win that job. I've been high on him in years past. Young Ho Koo. Again, we're talking about all these younger kickers that came onto the scene last year, but the Falcons, they did bring in some competition to go against Koo, but he doesn't excite me. He does have a decent leg, but again, inconsistencies there. I want someone who can consistently get me 8, 9, 10 points instead of someone that's going to score me 18 one week and then 2 the next and then 4 the next. So I want someone that's going to be a little bit more consistent, and then hopefully the rest of my team can carry me through. Greg Joseph is another guy. He very small sample size with Tennessee last year. He did fine in the playoffs, but back in Cleveland he had some issues, and really he only had a few good kicks. They aren't seeming to add a whole lot of competition. So I would say avoid Greg Joseph. And then I just have learned to avoid Chicago Bears kickers, so just avoid Eddie Pinheiro at all costs, especially if they're playing at Soldier Field. Unless you want to see some more double doinks. And then it's really hard to find sleepers at the kicker position. But two guys that I came up with, I mentioned them already. Graham Gano. You won't need to draft him, but if he wins the starting job and you don't feel comfortable with your kicker position, I think you can get him. You could just stream him off the waiver wire, and you could have a really good plug-and-play starter at the kicker position. And then the same thing with Tyler Bass. See who wins the job, but if Bass wins, I think he has the chance to be a top 5 fantasy kicker. That's kind of my hot take of the day. But those are really the main guys to keep an eye on. There's a few others that I'm kind of meh on. Mike Badgley, Tyrod Taylor. If you think Tyrod Taylor can get them into the red zone enough to be in scoring situations, maybe you take them because they won't be scoring a lot of touchdowns if you're expecting them to get field goals. I would say avoid Austin Seibert. He's one guy I avoid. Didn't like him coming out. Still not a huge fan of him. Avoid Randy Bullock. Jason Myers is a guy I think you could draft. I actually would be willing to draft him in the later rounds. I think he'll have a decent year. He has a big leg as well. But then after that, Jason Sanders, avoid. Dustin Hopkins doesn't excite me. We already talked about Pinheiro, Mike Badgley, and Eldrick Rosas. So it really... I've given you the guys and stuff. Tucker, Butker, Zerline, Lutz, Gonzalez, Gay, Boswell, Elliott, Prater, McManus, Rosas, maybe a couple others. Those are the main guys that you'll want to target drafting. The rest are just meh. This could be a good year to stream kickers off the waiver wire, play it by the week. that's going to be it for today. Remember, keep the questions coming. I promise you I will answer them. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Let's get the word out. I did notice that I got a couple extra subscribers. Thank you for subscribing, and hopefully you'll continue to watch. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you next time when we cover the defenses. It'll be an interesting video, so don't miss it.